History is not just a record of dates and names, it is a tapestry of human struggle, ambition, and moments that redefine nations. And in the year 1871, the United States stood at a crossroads. The Civil War had ended, but the wounds were far from healed. The promise of Reconstruction flickered like a candle in the wind, threatened by violence, corruption, and secrets buried in the shadows. This is the story of a year that changed America forever. 6 years after the guns fell silent at Appomattox, the nation was still stitching itself back together. Southern states, under military occupation, were forced to accept the 14th and 15th Amendments, granting citizenship and voting rights to Black Americans. But equality on paper was not equality in life. The Ku Klux Klan, born in the ashes of the Confederacy, waged a campaign of terror. Lynchings, arson, and midnight raids became the brutal reality for thousands. And then, in the spring of 1871, President Ulysses S. Grant made a decision that would send shockwaves through the South. He signed the Ku Klux Klan Act, a law giving federal troops the power to crush the Klan's reign of terror. For the first time, the government declared war on domestic terror. But would it be enough? Yet even as the South burned with violence, another disaster struck, one so catastrophic it would eclipse everything else. On the night of October 8, 1871, a spark ignited in a Chicago barn, and within hours, the city was an inferno. But was it an accident or something more? Because in the ashes of Chicago, whispers began of conspiracy, of hidden crimes, of a secret that powerful men would kill to keep buried. 1871 was not just a year of tragedy, it was a year of reckoning. And this is only the beginning. October 8, 1871, a dry wind howled through the streets of Chicago, carrying with it the scent of hay, wood, and kerosene. The city, booming, reckless, built too fast, was a tinderbox waiting for a spark, and that night, it found one. The fire began in Patrick and Catherine O'Leary's barn on DeKoven Street. Legend claims a kick lantern started the blaze, but the truth? No one knows. What we do know is that within minutes, flames erupted like hell itself had cracked open. The fire department, exhausted from fighting another blaze the night before, arrived too late. Flames leaped from rooftop to rooftop, devouring pine plank roads, wooden buildings, even the very sidewalks. Embers rode the wind like demonic fireflies, igniting block after block. People ran with whatever they could carry. Some dragged trunks, others clutched Bibles. Many simply ran for their lives, their silhouettes swallowed by smoke. The Chicago River, thick with oil and debris, didn't stop the fire. It fueled it, turning the water into liquid flame. By midnight, the courthouse bell melted in its tower. The gasworks exploded, plunging streets into darkness lit only by fire. The wealthy fled in carriages. The poor drowned themselves in the river rather than burn. And still, the inferno grew. For 36 hours, Chicago burned. When the ashes cooled, 17,500 buildings were gone. 100,000 people, 1 in 3 Chicagoans, were homeless. And somewhere in the wreckage lay a question no one dared ask aloud. Was this disaster or something far darker? Because in the days after the fire, rumors spread of bankers who'd mysteriously moved their records, of land deeds that vanished before the flames came, of men who stood in the ashes and smiled. Chicago would rise again, but first, it had to uncover the truth, and that truth would lead to a conspiracy buried deep in the heart of America's elite. In the days after the fire, as Chicagoans picked through the wreckage of their lives, a disturbing pattern emerged. Certain buildings, banks, courthouses, the offices of powerful men had burned suspiciously completely, too completely, as if someone had made sure nothing remained. The official story held that dry conditions and bad luck doomed Chicago, but Fire Marshal Robert Williams didn't buy it. He testified before Congress that multiple simultaneous fires had broken out across the city that night, fires that started blocks apart in buildings with no connection. Witnesses came forward with stories that chilled the blood. A policeman swore he saw men carrying bundles of rags into empty buildings. A saloon keeper described strangers buying rounds for the house just before the flames came, keeping people drunk and distracted as the fire spread. And then there were the financial records. The Chicago Tribune reported that before the fire, someone had withdrawn nearly every cent from the Cook County Savings Bank. Land deeds for the most destroyed neighborhoods had been transferred days earlier. The Chicago Times would later write, it was as if certain men knew exactly when and where the fire would strike. The reconstruction would be the greatest urban renewal project in history. And who controlled the funds? The very bankers and industrialists whose properties had suspiciously survived. Men like Potter Palmer and Marshall Field, who would rebuild Chicago not as it was, but as they wanted it to be. But this was bigger than Chicago, because in the same year, in towns across the Midwest, Peshtigo, Holland, Manistee, city, other fires raged with the same unnatural fury. And in Washington, a different kind of fire was spreading through the halls of power. 1871 wasn't just a year of disasters, it was the year America learned how easily truth could burn. While the world watched Chicago burn, another fire raged just 250 miles north, one so devastating it turned entire towns to ash and made rivers boil. Yet today, hardly anyone remembers the Peshtigo fire, and that forgetting may have been by design. On the very same night, October 8, 1871, a firestorm unlike anything in recorded history tore through Wisconsin's lumber country. Flames moved like liquid, reaching 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Survivors described tornadoes of fire that lifted entire houses into the sky. The Peshtigo River became the only refuge, but even its waters grew so hot that those who sought shelter there boiled alive. The true death toll may never be known. Entire logging villages vanished without a trace. Mass graves held hundreds of bodies fused together by the heat. Yet in the national press, barely a mention. All eyes were on Chicago. Some said it was simple tragedy of the news cycle. Others noticed something peculiar. The Peshtigo region had been home to immigrant laborers and native communities fighting against railroad expansion, the very people who stood in the way of progress. In the fire's aftermath, the Chicago and Northwestern Railway suddenly found its path clear. Lumber barons like Isaac Stevenson consolidated millions of acres, and when survivors returned to claim their land, they found the records, miraculously, had burned. But the fires of 1871 held one last secret, because as the nation reeled from these twin disasters, powerful men in Washington were playing with matches of their own, and this time, they weren't burning buildings. They were burning the very foundations of American democracy. While flames consumed the Midwest, a different kind of fire was spreading through Washington, one fueled not by kerosene, but by pure, unadulterated greed. And at its center stood a railroad scheme so brazen, it would make modern lobbyists blush. Meet Crédit Mobilier of America, a company with a French name, an American address, and a plan to loot the treasury at gunpoint, only their weapons weren't bullets. They were shares of stock. Here's how the scam worked. Government pays Union Pacific to build railroads. Union Pacific pays Crédit Mobilier to do the work. But wait, Crédit Mobilier is Union Pacific. The same men own both. They charge taxpayers $94 million for $44 million of work and pocket $50 million in pure profit. Now you might wonder, how does such a scheme stay secret? Simple. You give shares to congressmen at special discounted prices. The vice president took 20 shares, future President James Garfield took 10. In total, nearly 30% of Congress became investors in their own corruption. The story might have died there until September 1871, when the New York Sun got hold of a railroad executive's letterbox. The headlines exploded. The king of frauds, most gigantic scandal of the age. Americans finally understood why their railroads cost so much, yet went nowhere. Why their taxes climbed while services crumbled. The public outrage made Chicago's fire look like a candle flame. But here's the real shock. When the trials came, only 2 men were convicted. The vice president kept his office. Garfield became president. The lesson was clear. In America, some fires don't destroy corruption, they perfect it. Yet even this wasn't 1871's darkest secret, because while Washington burned and the Midwest smoldered, something far older was waking in the West. While the East burned with fire and scandal, the West ran red with something far older, a violence written into the land itself. And on September 5th, 1871, near a place called Wickenburg, 6 men climbed into a stagecoach, unaware they were riding into the last act of a 300-year war. The Yavapai called this place the bones of the earth. The Spanish called it Despoblado, the uninhabited, but the men of the Arizona Territory knew the truth. This land belonged to anyone who could take it and keep it. When rescuers found the wreck, all 6 passengers had been stripped, mutilated, arranged in a grotesque circle. Newspapers screamed, "Indian butchery!" The territorial governor demanded cavalry. But the truth? The attack made no sense. The Yavapai didn't take scalps that way. The stage hadn't carried gold. And strangest of all, just weeks earlier, those same passengers had signed papers seizing sacred land for a new silver mine. The trial lasted 1 day. The jury took 3 minutes. They hanged 3 Yavapai men based on testimony from a child who didn't speak English, while the mine investors quietly divided up the dead men's claims. This wasn't justice, this was theater. Because 1871 was the year America decided the Indian problem required a final solution, and the West would become a laboratory for horrors. But the land remembers what history tries to forget, and in the shadows of Washington, men were already planning the greatest vanishing act of all. On December 15, 1871, as Chicago Chicago still smoldered and Crédit Mobilier's scandal raged. 13 men gathered in a private parlor just blocks from the White House. They came separately, by different routes, unaware that history was watching. What happened in that room remains contested to this day, but the law they passed, buried in railroad subsidies, numbered 46-147, did something extraordinary. It created a new federal corporation called the District of Columbia and quietly changed the very definition of America. Some claim this was mere bureaucratic housekeeping. Others point to the simultaneous rise of corporate trusts. Standard Oil, Carnegie Steel, and Ask. Was 1871 the year America ceased being a republic and became something else entirely? Consider this. In 12 extraordinary months, the Klan Act proved rights required force. The Great Fire erased inconvenient histories. Crédit Mobilier revealed government's price tag. And the West Blood cemented manifest destiny. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when we trace the threads, the burned documents, the bought politicians, the silenced witnesses, a pattern emerges. 1871 wasn't just a year of disasters. It was an autopsy of the American dream. The fires still burn. The ledgers still balance. The stagecoaches just move faster now. This is the past unfolded. And if you've seen the shadows we've revealed these 7 nights, you'll never look at history or today's headlines the same way again. Thank you.